Hey Munchkins! So today we're going to spend some time taking a look at a very specific political party that's formed in the late 1800s, known as the Populist Party. So the worksheet that you should have to go with this lecture is the one that says farmers had two problems in the Gilded Age at the top. So that's where we are going to be today. So I want to just set the background for what we're going to be talking about before we get into this. So the last time we saw farmers was on the Great Plains with westward expansion. And at the end of the westward expansion movement, farmers were kind of the ones in control of the Great Plains, right? Like cowboys were gone, Native Americans had been pushed off to reservations, miners had kind of gone. So really cowboys are the ones that are left on the Great Plains. So that's kind of where we are. But farmers have a lot of problems that associate being a farmer. So we're going to talk a little bit about those today and how this leads to a formation of a party specifically for these farmers. However, before we can jump in to talk about the problems faced by farmers in this period, I want to just let you know kind of something that we're going to associate with this lesson. And this kind of goes with this idea that one of my absolute favorite movies, The Wizard of Oz, is actually a political allegory for what was going on in the late 1800s. So an allegory is a story that has like a deeper meaning or a symbolism to it. And what you may not know about The Wizard of Oz is that before it was a movie, it was a book called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. It was written by a man named L. Frank Baum, who published it in 1900, so just after the populist movement kind of had its start. And although Frank Baum himself never confirmed this, there's a lot of kind of controversy around this and a lot of like historical thought on it. It is said that the story of The Wizard of Oz kind of serves as the symbol for the Populist Party. So I find that most of the times my students are at least familiar with The Wizard of Oz or have heard of it or probably seen it, but it maybe has been a while. So before we talk about it, I want you to watch this short little clip in order to familiarize yourself with the story of The Wizard of Oz, specifically the story of the book. You know that there are you might be aware as you're watching this, that some things between the book and the movie are a little bit different, specifically the colors of Dorothy's shoes. In the movie, they are ruby red slippers. In the book, they are silver, and that's going to become kind of important later. So I'm going to let you watch this clip here, and then we'll jump right back into talking about The Wizard of Oz.
This is a story about a young girl named Dorothy who lives in Kansas with her Aunt Em, Uncle Henry, and pet dog Toto. Her house is carried away in a tornado and she awakes to find that her house has landed in the land of Oz and killed the Wicked Witch of the East, a cruel witch who ruled over the Munchkins. Trying to get home, Dorothy puts on the Wicked Witch's silver shoes and after consulting with the Good Witch of the North, learns that she must ask Oz, the great wizard in Emerald City, to help her get back home. Traveling along the yellow brick road, Dorothy meets three unique individuals, all hoping Oz can grant them their desires. Scarecrow, a dumb scarecrow, wants Oz to give him a brain. Tin Woodman, a man made from tin, wants Oz to give him a heart. And Lion, a cowardly beast, wants Oz to give him courage. The group finally arrives at Emerald City, a grand city colored in green. There, they talk to Oz, who says that he will grant each of them what they seek if they will destroy the Wicked Witch of the West. At first, they are against it, but then later decide to give it a try. When they enter the land of the Wicked Witch of the West, the group is attacked by wolves, crows, and bees, but defeats each wave quite easily. Seeing this, the Wicked Witch calls on the wicked monkeys to attack them. The monkeys destroy Scarecrow and Tin Man, but capture Lion and Dorothy. And while being held prisoner, Dorothy destroys the Wicked Witch by splashing her with a bucket of water. The group goes back to Emerald City and demands that Oz reward them as promised. However, they discover Oz to be nothing more than a normal man. Oz pretends to give Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion what they want, but to help Dorothy, he builds a hot air balloon. Unfortunately, the balloon flies off without her. Upset, Dorothy is told to go to the Good Witch of the South for help. The group meets the Good Witch and Dorothy is told that her silver shoes can magically send her anywhere she wants. And in the end, with the special power of her shoes, Dorothy goes back to Kansas.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. So for the rest of the video here today, I'm going to have a couple friends with me who are going to go through this. So this is Dorothy Bear, and this is Scarecrow Bear, and of course, I can't talk about The Wizard of Oz without Toto. So they're going to be sitting here with me, and they'll come back to us at the end of the video here. So let's go ahead and start talking about some of those issues that farmers had during the Gilded Age. So the first major issue that we have with farmers is debt, right? We've talked about this a little bit in class already, how farmers are pretty much always in debt. Because in order for a farmer to make money, he has to first make a crop, right? So farmers are always owing money for land, machinery, seed, and they owe that money to the banks, right? That's where you borrow money from if you're trying to start a business or start a farm. So these farmers are owing money to the banks, but the problem is, in this time, the banks are controlled by the wealthy. Think about men like Rockefeller and Vanderbilt, all those big monopolists. And the wealthy people pretty much controlled the banks, and the banks controlled the money supply. So that meant how much money was actually being printed, right? How much was in currency. And so at the time, the standard in our country was something known as the gold standard. So basically what this meant is that less money is printed, and whatever money is printed is only backed by gold. So imagine that in Washington, D.C. somewhere, there's a giant vault with all of the gold owned by the United States government, right? And somebody comes in and appraises that gold and values that it's worth $100 million. So the federal government then will only print $100 million of currency, like paper dollars. Well, let's say, for example, that the value of gold drops and they appraise it then as $90 million. So $10 million of that currency comes out of circulation, and then there's less money on the market. People who liked the gold standard, who liked this kind of way of living, were called gold bugs, okay? So a lot of farmers were really upset by this because they basically thought that the banks were trying to take advantage of them. So they were trying to push for something called bimetallism, okay? So bimetallism means that farmers want to back up money with both gold and silver. Again, the idea being that if you're using silver, there's more silver than there is gold, right? There's less gold in the world. Silver's not worth as much, but there's more of it. So if you're backing up money with gold and silver, instead of $90 million in circulation, you might have $200 million in circulation, right? So this is a really big push for farmers during this time period, and people who supported this idea were called free silverites, all right? So basically the idea is that they want to use more money so that more money can be printed. And this way, farmers feel like they're going to be able to get more money, maybe pay back some of their debts, maybe not be so controlled by the wealthy people in the population, and maybe be able to kind of get on their own feet again. So this picture right here is one of the symbol. So you'll notice that for some reason they decided on bugs as being kind of the symbols here. So this is a silver bug symbol for somebody that wants free silver, right? So the idea being that silver is being used to back up the money. So that's the first problem that farmers encountered. The second problem that they had were railroads. So railroads are a pretty big deal for farmers because you can't get your crops to market without the railroads. But the problem is, when you're in a town, there tends to be only one railroad that runs through your town, right? You don't have like several different railroads through one town. So basically there's a monopoly on railroads wherever the farmers are. And these farmers feel like they're being overcharged in order to ship their crops. Now part of this goes back to when we were talking about the monopolies, and men like Vanderbilt were getting kickbacks from the railroad companies, so they ended up charging farmers more. So farmers always got charged more by the railroads. They kind of got hurt in this spectrum. So there's only one railroad, and basically there's no competition. So farmers feel like they're being taken advantage of. They're not stupid. So the farmers decide that they want the government to come in and to stop this kind of monopoly that's happening and to start regulating them. Here's the problem. See, the government doesn't regulate things at this time. That's a relatively common or modern idea. And so the farmers are really, the government's really concerned about this idea of regulation. Also, you got to imagine that big businessmen, particularly those that owns the railroad, are not really interested in this idea either. They don't want the government to say how they can and can't run their business. So the farmers decide that they're going to form a social organization that became known as the Grange. It was founded by a guy named Oliver Kelly. And actually, originally, it was just kind of a place for farmers to get together and hang out and like discuss new crop techniques and growing techniques and swap recipes and get to know other farmers around them. But eventually, this is going to become a political organization that starts to lobby for farmers' rights with the government. Again, these farmers are not stupid. They know they're being taken advantage of, and they want to put a stop to it. So the Grange is, as it's starting to promote the right of the farmer, they successfully get some politicians elected in state offices and local elections and to regulate the railroad within states. See, here's the thing, right? What they're saying is that if a railroad runs only through my state, so let's say there's a railroad that starts at one point in Nebraska and runs through the other end of Nebraska, it is the right of Nebraska to be able to regulate that railroad, right? Because it goes through Nebraska. Now, at first, the railroad companies really start to fight against this. However, there is a court case called Munn versus Illinois, in which this is upheld, that the states have the rights to regulate railroads within their state, okay? But get that key here. It's regulation within a state, right? Do most railroads only run through one state? No, they're transcontinental, right? They run through several states. Well, Nebraska has no right to tell, Wyoming how to run their railroad, even if the railroad goes through Nebraska and Wyoming, right? So what's really necessary is for the federal government to step in and regulate these interstate railroads, which most railroads are. So again, the Grange starts to really push for federal regulation, for the government of the United States to start regulating railroads that cross state borders, right? Now, they do actually get a law passed. This leads to the passing of the Interstate Commerce Act. So think about what that word means. Interstate means between states. So Interstate Commerce Business Act. So the idea here is that the Interstate Commerce Act regulates business that moves between states. The problem is although it is passed, it's not enforced, at least not yet. So it looks like it's a win for the Grange, but it doesn't end up being. Well, the Grange finds that it's not really successful in the federal government. So this leads to the development of farmers kind of coming together to form their own political party. And this is called the Populist Party, okay? So right now we're looking at the election of 1896. This is when the Populist Party first kind of makes its debut onto the main front. So if you look at the name populism, right? People, like popular, right? So it is the Popular Party or the party of the people. Most of the members of the Popular Party are like the common people of society or the little people of society, those that don't really get looked at by the federal government. Mostly we're going to be talking just about farmers, but also we're going to be looking at factory workers, right? Miners, the kind of people that are not really getting a say in government. Now the things that they want, first of all, they're wanting bimetallism, so they're really pushing for that gold and silver standard. They want to limit the number of working hours, and they want the government to regulate the railroads at a federal level, right? So they nominate this guy named William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan becomes a name that you will hear a lot in U.S. history. In fact, when I was in high school, in my AP U.S. history class, he kind of became the class mascot because he never dies. He just seems to keep cropping up in places in history where you don't expect him to come up again. So remember that name, William Jennings Bryan. So William Jennings Bryan, as he is starting to gain power, he starts to campaign. And he gives this really famous speech called the Cross of Gold speech, which we're actually going to look at this speech a little bit more in depth in class. But the Cross of Gold speech basically claims, or what William Jennings Bryan is basically claiming in this speech, is that the common man, the farmer, is being sacrificed to the federal government on a cross of gold. So there's this religious imagery. Think of Jesus being sacrificed on the cross, right? So rather than being sacrificed on a wooden cross, people are being sacrificed on a golden cross, right? So money, right? So William Jennings Bryan becomes very popular with a lot of the common people at this time. However, he is up against a pretty big party, the Republican Party. This is a party that's been established in the United States for a long time. They're also not a party that really wants change. They're also a party that's run by a lot of the major political bosses of the era. Remember, this is the party of Lincoln, right? Abraham Lincoln and Grant, they were all Republicans. So this is a really established party that a lot of people are already, it's pretty popular. So they run a guy named William McKinley, and his supporters are going to be mostly your powerful businessmen, right? So William McKinley gets the nickname the front porch candidate because this is how he would campaign, how he would campaign. So basically, the political bosses would go out into the country and go get people and bring them on the railroads to William McKinley's house. William McKinley would walk out of his house, he'd stand on his front porch, and he'd wave at people over here, and he'd wave at people over here, and then he'd go back in his house, and he wouldn't really say anything, he wouldn't give a speech, and all those people would go home and say, oh my God, I got to see William McKinley, it's so cool! And see, the political bosses didn't really want him to say anything because they were kind of afraid of what he might say. They didn't want him to gain a lot of popularity. And so they kind of said, dude, just chill, just wave, smile, act cool. We'll do all your campaigning for you. So if you had to guess, is little man or big money going to win the election of 1896? I hope you guessed big money because that's absolutely the winner. McKinley wins. And McKinley's thing is he's trying to symbolize this positive outlook in the country, right? Look at this poster here. Prosperity at home, prestige abroad, commerce and civilization, right? He's just trying to show how great America's going to be with him. So he promises this prosperity, and they don't really want this weird, wacky reformer, right? William Jennings Bryan. So that's kind of where the political party, the Populist Party, ends up. Now, according to kind of what the populists want, right, or the Republicans want, rather, they don't really want reform. They don't really want, a lot of help for the people out there. They kind of like their gig, right? However, here's what they don't count on. They don't count on this kind of loony member of the Republican Party who is secretly a reformer, who cares about social change. So they don't really know what to do with this guy. He's the head of the police force in New York for a while. He's starting to run for political office. He becomes Secretary of the Navy, and he's starting to get a little bit too much power. So the Republican Party decides that they want to kind of hide him away. Right? They want to bury him deep in politics where he can't bother anybody. And the best way to do that is to put him in the vice presidency, right? Because, the vice presidency is a lame job. Nobody does anything. The vice president doesn't have a specific role. So if you want to keep somebody quiet, you hide them away into the vice presidency. Yeah, sure, if McKinley dies, he could get elected, but what are the chances of that, right? Well, maybe they should have paid more attention to James Garfield, who had just been shot, right? So this little loony reformer is Teddy Roosevelt. And sure enough, William McKinley gets assassinated, and Teddy Roosevelt becomes the new president of the United States in the early 1900s. So Teddy Roosevelt, he goes back to these ideas of populism, and he takes those ideas and he kind of dusts them off a little bit, cleans them up, shakes them out, and he renames it into the Progressive Party. So we're going to get to see that even though populism doesn't really succeed, it doesn't really go anywhere either, right? So to go back here to the Wizard of Oz, so me and Toto are going to look at what all of the different elements of the Wizard of Oz symbolize here. So first of all, we've got Oz itself. So Oz is an abbreviation for ounces, as in ounces of gold. So really the title of the book is The Wonderful Wizard of Ounces, or The Wonderful Wizard of Gold, right? So that's Oz. The second one that we've got is Dorothy herself. So Dorothy kind of represents, she's this young girl from Kansas, right? She's just kind of everyman. She's the American citizen, right? She doesn't really know what's best in order to get back home. She doesn't really know how to do that. She needs some guidance by the witches that kind of help her along the way. So she's just kind of the everyman, somebody we can all associate with. Next we have the Wicked Witches themselves. So the Wicked Witch of the East that Dorothy kills right at the beginning are the banks, the ones that are controlling the money supply. The Wicked Witch of the West are the railroads. So think about banks being on the East Coast and railroads running west. It's the same kind of idea. The next we have the Munchkins. So the Munchkins are just the little people, right? They're the ones like the farmers, the miners, the people that don't have a lot of rights. So when Dorothy shows up, she meets all these people that they need somebody to fight for them, right? So that's who the Munchkins are. Next we've got two different things here. So we've got the yellow brick road. So the yellow brick road represents gold. Dorothy's shoes, which remember in the book are silver, represent actual silver itself. You put those two things together, you've got bimetallism. You've got the gold and silver standard, right? Finally, the next one we have here is the Tin Man. So the Tin Man is the factory worker, the one with no heart, right? Because the factories have turned these guys into machines, basically, and they don't have any heart. Next, you've got the Scarecrow. So the Scarecrow should be pretty obvious, just look at him. He represents the farmer, right? The basis for the Populist Party. The Lion, so our Cowardly Lion, a man who's big and boisterous, but doesn't actually have a lot of power, that's William Jennings Bryan, the political candidate, right? Like we thought he was going to come into power. He said a lot of really good things. He's loud, but in the end, he was kind of cowardly and really couldn't push it all the way. Next, we have the Wizard himself. So think about who the Wizard is. You know, he seems like this great and powerful guy, but when you pull back the curtain, he's really just a puppet, right? He's just an average guy. He doesn't have a lot of control. He's being controlled by, you know, the political machines of the era. So the Wizard represents William McKinley. And then finally, Washington, D.C. itself is represented by the Emerald City. Remember, the Emerald City is green, right? So that's really where the power is and where the money is. So all of these things, when you put them together, really do seem like they make kind of this Populist Party allegory here. So I want to end today with just thinking about my favorite song from the movie. So here we go.
Well, come on.
Yeah, it's sad, believe me, missy, when you're born to be a sissy without the vim and verve. But I could show my prowess, be a lion, not a mouse, if I only had the nerve. I'm afraid there's no denying I'm just a dandelion, a fate I don't deserve. I'd be brave as a blizzard.
I'd be gentle as a lizard.
I'd be clever as a gizzard.
If the wizard is a wizard who will serve
Then I'm sure to get a brain.
A heart.
a home.
The knave.
Oh, we're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Here he is, the Wizard of Wiz, if ever a whiz there was. If ever a whiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does.